Well, friends, we have a really good show for you today. We are going to be taking a look at an article in the latest Nexus magazine on the pyramids of Egypt, particularly the Great Pyramid. We are also going to be taking a look at how they might have dealt with the granite blocks by softening the material, producing chemical compounds that were discovered in the rotting leaves and bush material that was discovered in Peru. For example, let's take a look at curare and some of the other plants.
The point I was going to make was once you fired your curare arrow into a monkey and the monkey drops out of the tree, there's your lunch. So you start eating it or cooking it or whatever you're going to do with it, and you eat it. So the question was, if you eat the meat that has been contaminated with curare, why doesn't it affect you? This was the question asked by a scientist who was researching what was going on with the poison tip arrows. And the answer was straightforward when you think about it. The arrow went into the monkey, entered its bloodstream. So when you eat that monkey or part of the monkey, it goes into your stomach. And inside the stomach is an enzyme which neutralizes the curare. That is why you're not affected by it. It doesn't enter your bloodstream when you eat it. Before it can enter your bloodstream, it's been neutralized. So the next question was obvious. How do you know that? And the answer was, we asked the plants. Every plant has a purpose, if only we can spend the time to identify it. So that's why when you eat curare poisoned animals, you're not affected.
So then it's interesting going back to the plants and the derivatives from the plants. What would have happened be some of these plants, the leaves might have fallen over and piled on each other from different species. Then it rotted away, the rain, it got mushed up, and all this happened on a pile of rocks. And then the rocks softened, and somebody probably came along and said, hey, wait a minute. Usually discoveries happen like that. It's
Yeah.
just out of pure strangeness.
High strangeness in many cases.
So could the pyramids have been constructed in the same manner? Could they have used some of that plant derivative to soften the granite and then use primitive saws to cut it? You would be cutting through butter.
Yeah, you would. And butter's quite easy to cut through. You can cut through butter with a piece of wood, and then it would harden again. Now, there was apparently a Spanish priest who was working in Peru, in Cusco, and he was trying to find the answer to this, the rock softening liquid. He was aware of it, and he developed a solution which could soften rock. But his only problem was he couldn't then stop the process, because there is apparently another process you have to do to stop the softening and return the rock to its original structure. And if it's granite, or in South America, it's called andesite. Andesite and granite are the same thing. They come from different places. If you can stop the process and the rock then returns to its original structure, it will be hard, solid, and support considerable weight, because that's what granite does. It's a very useful process. There's also something called Roman concrete. You may have heard of Roman concrete. A lot of buildings in Rome still stand today, 2,000 years after they were built, like the Colosseum. Why is the Colosseum still standing? How many buildings built today would be standing in 2,000 years? Probably not many, because the concrete we use, Portland cement, doesn't last very long. And it's only recently that people have been able to identify the components of Roman concrete. And it involved volcanic materials ground up. Certain other minerals were used in there. But Roman concrete is a remarkable, incredible structure that seems to harden the longer it lives. Probably the most famous one of those is the Pantheon in Rome, which has a dome as its roof with a little hole in the center, and that is made of unreinforced concrete, Roman concrete.
That
It's
was an engineering marvel, that dome. There was one channel that was showing how that dome was constructed, or how they thought it was constructed. It could not have been made in one piece and then placed there. It had to be constructed in pieces. And you know what it's like trying to place a dome onto something when you're trying to build it in pieces. And then you go and you make matters worse and put a little hole in the top.
yeah, extraordinary. And the Egyptians managed to do similar things, which we can't do today. So let science have a look at it and try to answer the question. How did they build the Great Pyramid? With the
Um,
70-ton blocks of granite, how did they get them from Aswan 500 miles up to Giza in the first place?
that reminds me of Ed Leedskalnin's Coral Castle. There was one experience where the truck driver that was transporting the materials, remember he had to take it apart and they had to move it somewhere else.
That's right. Yep,
Ed said, "Don't worry about it, leave the truck there. It will all be unloaded in the morning." And the
that's right.
truck drivers couldn't believe it. He says, "There's no way you're going to get all of that material off of that truck by the morning." And of course, the truck driver comes back. It's all nicely piled up, ready
Yep.
to reassemble. And he was the only one there.
And he was only about 5 foot tall. He was quite a small person. And I think one of the points he made was, I know how the Great Pyramid was built, but he didn't say how.
Yes, that's right. And then you have these other people that say, well, he did it with rollers and he did it with this, and he had some type of device in these boxes that he wouldn't let anybody look at. Then one fellow on YouTube, he recreated the whole thing. He said what it was there were batteries in those boxes and they were powering these motors, and the motors were just making this circular motion, and he had all of these wires linked up to these saws that were doing all the cutting, and they were all over the place. And this is how he said that Ed cut all of that material.
Yeah. It's like people are desperate to find a solution that they can understand based on the current paradigm of science. But if what Ed Leedskalnin was doing and the pyramids and all the other things that we question how they were built, if they were using some other method of construction that we don't understand because we've never identified it, all of these explanations may sound logical, may sound even reasonable, but put them into practice. People who say, oh, they can just lift these blocks up in the pyramid. Okay, go and do it. There's somebody who demonstrated quite convincingly how Stonehenge might have been built. He created these 20-ton blocks of concrete, which he was able to move himself on his own by putting little pebbles underneath that could then spin the block around and raising them up using blocks of wood. As you tilt it, put a block of wood under, tilt it the other way, another block of wood. Yeah, that's a logical explanation. It may well be the case. But how many pieces of wood would you need to build to create the pyramid, 200 foot up in the air? Stonehenge isn't that big, and they were using big cranes to re-erect some of the stones that had fallen over back in the 1950s.
But back to Egypt, to the pyramids, there was another fellow that was displaying that they actually used primitive cranes to haul those granite bricks up there. They would make smaller cranes and they would put them on levels, and then they would go level one, it would go up to the next crane, level two. Then they would have these inclined ramps, and on the ramps, they would grease it all down, and then they had a come along up at the other end of it that pulled those granite bricks on that oily surface, that greasy surface. And then when it got up to that level, then they had another small crane that brought that up to the next level. And then they would have another one of these ramps that they had greased, and then they would do the same. And they just kept repeating it. But that's his explanation, because he
Yeah,
said they've actually found grease on those walls and on the platform where those rocks were slid up. But
yeah,
this is the funny thing. They have never found any cranes. They've never found any ropes. They've never discovered any materials or any evidence that any of this type of system was used. They've only found the grease. That's it.
no, Greece was probably around. I wonder where
Yeah.
it came from. But you see that, yeah, that's yet another explanation which sounds logical, but has he demonstrated it physically?
No.
No. There was somebody who tried to demonstrate it physically. You remember many years ago in America, there was a series of programs called NOVA.
Yes.
They decided they would build a pyramid and film it. And they cut these blocks about the same size as used in the Great Pyramid. Obviously, they used modern saws to do it,
Mhm.
and they hauled them up the ramps. and they built this thing. It was quite a small thing. I think it still exists today. It's still there. But they had one problem. They couldn't get the capstone on. They built a sort of pyramid-shaped capstone to go on the top of this little, it was about 20 foot high, not very big at all. But they couldn't get the capstone on. So they used a forklift truck. That's the modern answer. Oh, no, we can build a pyramid. No, you can't. Not when you use forklift trucks, which hadn't been invented 4,500 years ago. They hadn't even invented diesel engines.
That's a good point. The cap. Well, that means that you would have to think well ahead and you would have to be dragging that cap, the completed cap. You would have to be dragging that up those ramps, crane, crane, up the greased ramp, another crane, crane, another greased ramp, crane, and this would go right to the top. That cap would be going up with the pyramid because that's the only way you would get it up there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course it is. Because there's nowhere to stand to put the capstone on, unless you have ramps that are the size of the pyramid as well.
And then the other problem is once you get that cap up there, what are you going to do? Drag one of these cranes up one of these greased ramps and then somehow get it through the roof in a tiny little hole and then install it on the outside 450 feet in the air? It's not going to work.
No, it's not going to work. You see, this is the point. Come on, science, answer the question. How do you build a great pyramid? Was it with acoustic levitation, which we know exists? If so, demonstrate it. Don't just talk about it. Don't just write about it. Demonstrate it. It's very simple because we know that a glass can be broken by the human voice. That can be demonstrated. It can shatter. It's the frequency of the human voice that builds up in the glass to the point where the glass cannot remain in place. It shatters.
They match the frequency of the glass with their voice, or they sing and they match the frequency, and as soon as it hits the frequency of that glass, shatters.
So we know that sound can have an effect on a physical object. So if we start looking at, well, how do you lift a 70-ton block of granite 200 feet into the air? Was it done with sound? It could have been. It's one possible answer. I'm not saying it's the only answer. But if the frequency of the granite can be matched by the frequency of sound, maybe it will have an effect on the granite.
Well, now some of these scientists are coming out with these other theories that they were using balloon or balut type material that was filled with air or water, and then they would put those balutes on top of the bricks, float them, and then open up water gates to release the bricks down onto the pyramid surface. So there's another one for you. And then we have another way that was shown. What they did was, as the pyramid was being constructed and it was getting higher and higher, they would build ramps around the outside of the pyramid, and it would keep on going and going and going until it got to the top. Well, here's the problem with that. As soon as the pyramid starts getting narrower, well, now the ramp incline starts increasing. So by the time you get 3/4 of the way up there, that's game over. You're not going to be dragging anything up anywhere, no matter how much grease or how many logs or no matter how many pebbles you're dragging that piece of granite up on.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
No, and imagine now you're getting 5/8 of the way to the top. Wow, do you imagine the incline that is going to be then?
People have tried dragging a 1-ton block of stone, and how many people does it take to drag 1-ton blocks? About 10 people.
Yeah, again, Easter Island, the way they're walking those statues. They put ropes around them, and it takes 20 people on those ropes, 10 people on one side, 10 on the other, and they're rocking it back and forth with the ropes. That's how they say that they got these in place. They rocked them back and forth with these ropes, and they were showing it did work. It took forever.
And did they have ropes on Easter Island strong enough to support a 50-ton moai? I doubt it. And then you've got to put the cap on the top because that's a couple of tons of rock putting on top of the head. I mean, it's a logical explanation and it's acceptable, but does it work? We've got to demonstrate these things.
Yes. You're not going to be walking tons of granite that's in the shape of cubes.
No, you're not.
There's nothing for them to pivot on.
There's a story about, Nan Madol in the Western Pacific. It's an island in Micronesia. which has these basalt columns. You get basalt columns when you get, Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. It's basalt column. Anyway, basalt columns. There are hundreds of these basalt columns on Nan Madol. It's built into certain shapes, sort of rectangular shapes. It sort of looks like it's artificial, which it is. It's just artificial. When it was first discovered, it was only discovered about 100 years ago. People said, well, how to the locals still living in the area, how was this built? And they said, oh, we flew them through the air. And they said, oh, don't be so stupid. You can't fly 50-ton blocks of basalt through the air. How do they know they couldn't do it? This is the point. Flying them through the air, it's a logical way because they're too heavy to put into boats. They've still got to then be lifted about 30 foot up into the air as well.
Okay, now you're back to the pyramids. You're
Yeah,
telling me that they placed tons and tons of granite blocks onto one of those reed ships and floated it up or down the Nile without it sinking.
yeah, past the cataracts. The sort of rough bits with the rocks in the river, because they hadn't moved them at that point.
So the boats are going to drag down on the bottom of that, and that's going to come to an end pretty quick. There's this city that's thousands of years old, and it's carved into a hill. This place goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles. They still haven't got to the end of it. One scientist said it could be hundreds of miles deep and long. And we're not just talking about one level either. We're talking multi levels. This is one of the most incredible things that these people have discovered. So we're talking about carving out this city that was made from volcanic ash hardening into a soft rock called tuff. My goodness, 50 to 100 miles worth of tunnels. There's rooms in there. It's so well engineered that the columns are placed every so often. There
Yeah,
are vents that have been drilled that go right up to the top of the hill, and they're placed every so often.
sounds like you're describing Cappadocia in Turkey, which is quite close to Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, which has only recently been discovered, and they're 10,000 years old.
How are they digging all of this material out of there? You're not going to be digging with copper shovels, copper tools. You're going to need something else to soften that rock or something.
And where did all the material excavated from inside this, where did it go? Where's this
Yes.
great heap of material?
They haven't found that either.
Yeah. I mean, it's a similar question to ask about the Kailasha Temple in India, in the part of the Ellora Caves, which is a 200-foot by 400-foot temple. That's what it looks like, carved from the top down. To calculate, about 200,000 tons of material were removed to create the temple. Where did all that material go? Nobody's ever found it. It's just missing. It's just vanished. But the temple exists. You can go and see it. You can go into it. It's a beautiful construction, discovered fairly recently.
You have to get rid of that material somewhere. They didn't have dump trucks. They didn't have bulldozers. Come on, you can't just carry that out. What are you going to do? Did they carry it all out in baskets? Well, if they did, where is it?
Yeah, where is it? Exactly. There's a question to be answered. Nobody's answered it yet because nobody's found it. It's extraordinary. Like Cappadocia, where's the hundreds of thousands of tons of material which were excavated from this to create this multi-layered city?
And how did they drill the holes for the vents?
Yeah, exactly. Come on, science. These are things you need to answer and answer with facts, figures, and scientific investigation. We can ask the question. That's our job. It's your job, Mr. Scientist, to answer it. Let's see people trying to answer these. You can come up with all sorts of explanations, but you'll find, like the Nova team filming the construction of their little pyramid, they had to use modern equipment to finish the job. Forklift trucks weren't around in ancient Egypt.
Well, let's face it, going back to Moses again, if these Egyptian priests were using this secretive art to turn inanimate objects into serpents, then there's a secret to building these pyramids. There has to be. But of
Yeah,
course, now people are going to say, well, now you're going into the esoteric, and now we're talking magic here. And there are things that are unseen that we have no idea what they are or how they got there, but it does exist.
Yeah, it exists. This is the point. It exists. You can go and see it and touch it and feel it and measure it.
Yeah.
It exists. But how did it get built? How did it happen? Oh, go back to the Great Pyramid. It's considered to be one of the wonders of the ancient world, the only one that still exists, apparently.
But one of the scientists was saying that there used to be water all over that region. And what they did was they floated these granite blocks right to the location. Well, I have a problem with that because first you need to build a foundation. And you cannot build a foundation when there is 10 feet of Nile River there.
Of course not.
I mean, they didn't have pile drivers that they could drive piles in and then start building on top of the piles.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
Yeah,
we take a look at the Sphinx. Well, look at all the erosion around the Sphinx. That only happens when there's water.
yeah. It's water erosion,
Yes.
especially the vertical parts, not necessarily the horizontal. Some of
Nope.
that could be wind blown.
But you don't see that water erosion anywhere on the pyramids.
No, you don't.
So that Sphinx had to be there before those pyramids were constructed.
Probably was. And of course, the pyramids had the Tura limestone facing, which what made it so impressive. They didn't appear to have any entrance to it.
By the way, what happened to all that limestone?
The story is that it was removed to build some of the mosques and buildings in Cairo. But if that is the case, surely by now somebody might have been able to spot a particular piece of limestone in a mosque or a temple or a church or whatever it was, whatever they used it for, which had some inscriptions on it. Because the points that we make here about the Great Pyramid was that historically it had inscriptions on it and colored bands, the 7 colored bands, colors of the rainbow. And the inscriptions were to do with agriculture, to do with science, to do with historical information, and also to do with future information. It's like it was a prediction device, but nobody could read the inscriptions because they were created probably in hieroglyphs, which it took till 1830 to be able to read hieroglyphs.
But then again, usually it was the ruling class and the priests. They're the only ones that could read and write. The general population did not know how to do these things because they were not educated. I mean, even let's look at the feudal system. A serf could not read, could not write. And again, with the Bible. And this is where the priests trapped these poor people because they would tell them they're burning in hell and all these horrible things that would happen, and that would keep them in line to do the
Yeah,
bidding of the Lord of the land. When
yeah.
you can look in any Bible, it doesn't say you're going to hell when you die. I don't know where they get this from because I've read 5 different Bibles and I haven't been able to find anything in any Bible that says you're going to this magical place called hell where these demons are poking you with pitchforks and stuff. Because I'm telling you, do you think a father would take his son's hand and hold it on a hot stove?
No, it's not the way it works.
No, so I don't think so. But in
But
any
it,
case, these priests, of course, they're the only ones that could read this and would have the knowledge, and then they would pass that down to the other priests and the ruling class, but eventually that's going to peter out.
yeah, because once people can learn to read, learn to write, and learn to speak intelligently, that sort of power dissipates. It's no longer there. But as you say, that is how the ruling classes maintained order and maintained their position. And that came from the priesthood. That was social control.
Yeah.
Oh dear, oh dear. It was a very strange world. That's why one of the great inventions of modern times was the printing press. So information could be disseminated and people could be taught to read.
I would really love to know what they found in that Grand Canyon that is so important that they have to close everything up, put the
Yeah,
military there, have a military presence. That is very strange.
it is. That is very strange because something exists. I mean, why put the military to stop people going there? People want to explore, they want to find out. There appear to be a lot of Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. There are certainly names from Egypt in the Grand Canyon of certain mountains, certain hills, certain features.
It's like the flood.
Yeah,
You have all of these different cultures that have the flood story in
yeah,
their culture. And
right.
yet, this started in one place on the earth, and the story got told and told and told. And again, they find these inscriptions and these stories being told on the other side of the planet
Yeah,
when no one could cross the ocean. We didn't have boats, we didn't have planes. So, how on earth did these stories end up in these caves carved on the walls halfway around the planet?
because it happened in all those different places, the same event, one of the most dominant myths in history.
Then we could take a look at some of the older things that they have discovered. For example, Titicaca and places like that, where they're
Yep,
finding this architecture and people just cannot believe what's going on here for
yeah,
the time period. So it could well be that these places are much older than we think.
I think you're right. I think they are much older, but we don't recognize them as being older because the academics who examine these places and write the books and write the essays and the articles about them are using their position and knowledge to convince us that they are right. There's no evidence that they are right. And I think you're quite correct to challenge it because there are so many anomalous structures around planet Earth that we cannot explain. South America's full of them, Asia's full of them, North America's full of them, South America's chock full of them.
Well, look at the Grand Canyon. They found Egyptian artifacts in there.
Yes, they did.
How did they
And,
get there?
and why is part of the Grand Canyon off limits? It's not because it's dangerous, because people going to climb in the Grand Canyon would not be foolish enough not to take the right equipment with them. There are places in the Grand Canyon which have been reported as containing Egyptian-style artifacts, but we're not allowed to see them. Why is that? There are places in the Grand Canyon named after Egyptian locations. Extraordinary. And the famous Smithsonian Museum seems to lose a lot of artifacts when they're inconvenient to explain, because Smithsonian is in America like the British Museum is in the UK. It's the prime repository of artifacts. In the British Museum, there are millions of artifacts. They're not all on display. The same as the Smithsonian, they would not all be on display, but if they're not catalogued and they cannot be found, and some of the stories of people who have identified Egyptian-style hieroglyphs seen within caverns in the Grand Canyon could well be correct, could well be true. But why are we not allowed to see them? Why aren't expeditions being sent into the Grand Canyon to find them if they exist? There are plenty of people who are perfectly capable of climbing into the Grand Canyon, just like the Great Pyramid is unexplained within our current paradigm of archaeology. But once you start examining the earlier records kept by respected historians, such as Herodotus, who is acknowledged as being the father of historical archaeology, he's the first person to report on it, and his writings still exist in libraries, like in Alexandria, the Bodleian Library in Oxford, the British Museum in London, the Smithsonian in America. What's going on? There's so many anomalies within the historical record that maybe we should just start again and say, okay, let's look at it for the first time. What are we looking at here? If we're looking at a Great Pyramid, we're not looking at a tomb. We're not looking at a depository for grain. We're looking at something we don't fully understand. Could it be an energy generating device, as Chris Dunn has identified and written about in the Giza power plant? He's a high-tech engineer, and he back-engineered the Great Pyramid. And that was his conclusion. It was a power plant. It was a device for creating energy.
But you know, one thing I still don't understand about that. When we look at the Dendera bulbs that were found in one of those pyramids, I believe, one fellow was saying that most of these people that are looking into this and thinking that they're electric light bulbs are actually wrong. Because he said when you start looking into the history and the religion of the Egyptians of that time, those were flowers. And inside of that, they used a serpent to represent something. But what I don't understand is that if that's the case, then why would they have these wire-looking objects coming out of the bulbs and then going into that rectangular box that almost looks like some kind of a battery power supply. So that's one thing that I don't understand.
Yeah. They're in the crypt underneath the main floor of the Dendera Temple, which is north of Luxor. It's about 2 hours drive north of Luxor. And if you go into the crypt of the Dendera Temple, that's where you see what look like light bulbs. There are 4 of them shown altogether, 2 of the main ones. Now, recently somebody has reconstructed those light bulbs. Now, if you think of a neon light tube, a long thin tube, and you pass an electric current through it, it lights up. What is it that is lit? There's a gas, there's a plasma gas inside that tube. This person's conclusion was that the Dendera light bulbs contained plasma, which if you pass an electric current through it, it illuminates. That could be an explanation for how underground murals and decorations within tombs, in pyramids if you like, but in tombs, were created with no apparent soot from a candle on the ceiling.
Then there was another theory that I was looking at when the sarcophagi were placed in the pyramids and then the bodies were placed in the sarcophagi. What he was saying was that they were placed first, and then the room was built around it. So you'd have all the rooms that were built around inside, whatever they were doing, and then you would build the walls up, the bricks on the outside, the limestone bricks. Then, when you got the bricks up so high, then you would start to do your artwork on the inside of the walls because now you have the sunlight. When the artwork was completed, then you build it up higher, and then you might add another story. You might do some more artwork. Once you're finished, you build that up higher. And then eventually you're going to get to an apex where you put the cap on, and that's the end of your sunlight, and that's the end of the work. And I'm thinking that perhaps that's why you don't see any of those soot marks anywhere in those walls. So we can add that theory to the growing list. List.